Well, it's a beautiful afternoon here in Guthrie, Oklahoma, and I'd love to be out driving the old car, one of them, but as usual, it's not ready. So instead of being out driving the car, we're going to do the next best thing. We're going to work on it. All right, here we go. Today's project is a fairly simple one, hopefully a simple one. We're going to be fixing the ride height. Let me adjust this and I'll show you why we have to fix the ride height. I've mentioned it in a couple of the previous videos, adjusting the stick here. But the car sits, oh man, that's probably a terrible angle. The car sits, well, at a glance, as you're looking at it here, the ride height on the car looks fantastic. But because of this stock front end, the car sits entirely too low, and we only have what is probably right about 2 7/8 of an inch oil pan clearance, and that's just not enough. Thus why we smashed the oil pan, as you can see over there, on a bump in the driveway. Yeah, if you didn't hear about that, you have to check out the video where we went to the Guthrie car show. We started that morning by smashing the oil pan. So the plan here is, I got this car, it was set at this ride height, and I don't know what springs are on it, and I don't even know if this camera angle's any good. Let me adjust. I had the stick flipped one way to show you that measurement underneath, and now I need to flip it the other way. There we go. So the plan here is to take the springs out that are in here, because I think someone cut them or heat them, or they're just flat out a spring for a different application. Maybe it's a lowering spring that was intended for this type of application. I don't know what they are, but we're going to get those out of here. And I've got a set of stock springs that I took off of this car when I pulled the front clip on it. Eventually we'll get back to working on that. I just want to be able to drive this one first, so we've got to unsort some stuff. But yeah, so we're going to get those springs out. I'll compare them to the stock springs to see if I can tell any real difference. There's going to be no way to gauge what the load rating is on them, how many pounds per inch they compress at. So that we're just going to have to deal with. But we'll be able to see right out the gate, we'll be able to see how similar they are. I think there might even be the wrong diameter, because there was a little bit of play when I was messing on the other side when I had the wheel off. So we'll have to look at that. And then I think the shocks that are on the front of this right now are also probably no good, because it's a little bouncy. So I have the shocks off the red car as well. They still got some life in them. They're not great, but they're not wasted. So we'll use those for now. And the mud bucket that goes around the spring, if the ones that are in this car are a little rotten, we'll throw these other ones on that I took off the red car that are in decent shape. I mean, they could use a cleanup and a paint, but that's not going to happen. But yeah, so that's the plan. I won't bore you with the tearing it apart. I'll get dug into it, get the wheel off, and we'll pick up from there. Okay, so we're making progress, not as fast as I'd like. Part of this is because this is a bit of the car's got a little bit of rust in it, and everything I'm having to work on right now has got some road grime in it. The first real problem I ran into was getting the shock tower off, and I'll show you what the issue was there and how to resolve it. Let me see if I can do this one-handed. Yep. Okay, so shock towers. Flip this around. Here we go. I guess we'll do it this way and this way. All right, so the shock towers, these guys right here, which as you can see, I've got this one completely removed. And I have this problem I'm about to tell you with both sides. I just haven't actually pulled the shock on this side yet. But when I started pulling the nuts off, the carriage bolts just started spinning, which a carriage bolt is a bolt that has no hex or Phillips or anything on the top side to hold on to. It's just got a square that it sits down into a slot. So you can see here that we've got slots, and these bolts are in here like this, pointed up, and that square is what holds it from spinning while you're backing it off. So it requires two things. One, it requires as you're pulling them loose, it requires it to stay up in the slot so it doesn't slide, so that it doesn't spin, because if it slides out of the slot, then it can spin, right? But it also requires a square section on there, and hopefully this isn't too blurry. Let me make sure I can see what I'm doing here. As you can see, this is one of the ones I took out, and all four of them are exactly the same. There's almost no square left on there. And it looks like it was never there to begin with. There's just hardly anything, barely the thickness of the sheet metal and the little corners rounded down. So I'll be replacing them with these ones, which were in my other car. Obviously, one, they're much cleaner. I think someone in the past may have replaced the originals, because this is a more rounded head. It's not partially flat like this one is. It's more rounded, but you can see that it's got lots of square on there, which will allow it to go into that slot and actually engage with the slot so that it doesn't spin free. Because that was a problem. Getting those carriage bolts out was a major issue. And what I ended up doing over here is I ended up having to take my pry bar and with my mallet tapped it in between the spring and the head of the carriage bolt. And then I had to sit there and I had to work the nut a little bit at a time, back and forth with, I've used WD-40, but any sort of penetrating oil lubricant on there to get it to actually back off a little bit at a time, because these nuts had never been off. There was paint on the threads, and they just didn't want to come off of there. So that was the first problem. And I did get them all off. The other alternative would be to, if it starts spinning on you, take a death wheel and cut them off and put new bolts in. Try not to tear up your shock tower unless you have a replacement. So that was the first problem. And then I had to get down under here. And you can see I've got the mud bucket here, which goes up here like so, bolted in, or when it's bolted in. I've got that free, and I had to battle that a little bit too, because you can see the fasteners that hold that on there were pretty grimy as well. Pulled one or two, and they really fought me, so I ended up grabbing WD-40 and throwing WD-40 on them, and that really helped those come loose. And they weren't too bad, other than it's a little bit tough to reach because you have to have one arm under here, and the other arm's got to be up under here and under here to get to all the bolts to get that out. But now we're at the point where the coil spring is exposed. We can get spring clamps on it and clamp that son of a gun up and get it out of there. So that's going to be the next step. But one thing I did want to point out before I pull it out of here, hopefully there's enough light. You can see right here, kind of. Let me grab a flashlight real quick. I'll show you one of the things that I don't care for in how this was in here. But I haven't moved the spring at all, and you can tell by how much corrosion is on there that spring, that end coil wasn't actually seated in. It should be all the way over, against the end. I don't know if you can kind of see where my finger is. That end of that coil should be, all the way over here. It's about what looks to be 1.5 inches out of place. And now that I've got a light on it, I see something else real interesting, but I'll get the spring out of the car and show you what that looks like. So yeah, that's where we're at. I don't have the mud bucket off the other side yet, so I'm gonna go ahead and get that out. Then I'll drop both springs out, and I'll compare those against the stock springs. And once I've got those out, and I'll show you what they are. And if I run into any problems, I'll actually try and remember to stop and show what the problem is and how I'm tackling it at the time that I'm tackling it, so you can see exactly what I did. Unlike what I did with the shock towers, I just proceeded to work on it and get them out of there and went, oh, hey, probably should have filmed that. Anyway, I'm gonna get back to work, and catch up with you once I hit the next step. So, working with palm coil springs, unless you're a shop that's got the high dollar tools to do this, it's a tedious, can be tiresome job, especially depending on what your access is. The tool that I'm using is just a coil spring compressor that you can get just about anywhere. This type's fairly inexpensive. Let me pull this one out real quick. I'll show you. Maybe I might have it bound in there now already. There we go. So basically, it's just got 2 cast iron J hooks on it. There's another one you can get that's got bent metal, that's got a wider grip. They're a little bit narrower, but I tend to favor this style because of the locking pin, but that's just me, just because I don't want one of these things to pop off a spring, which can happen, and then your spring, if it's compressed and one of these pops loose for whatever reason, that can turn into a real disaster real quick. These springs can be really dangerous when they're under a lot of pressure. And it takes a lot of pressure to get them collapsed. So I like the fact that this particular tool has a pin that helps keep everything on there, because as you tighten these up, they start to tweak a little bit, and because depending on how the spring deforms, or if you're in a situation like this where space is limited and I can't get this back around so it's straight across from each other, because ideally you want these on opposite sides from one another at 180 degrees, but because of access I just can't do that. So I've got to keep, they're a little close together on one side, which means the spring's going to want to bow a little bit away, which in this case, why it's up here is not a terrible thing, because if something were to happen, it would want to most likely shoot into the fender well, not shoot out, because it's being squeezed that direction. If you think about, you're bending a stick, and when it snaps, it wants to throw stuff away, to the direction that the bow is. Same kind of thing here. But yeah, so you get these guys up in here, and in this case, with this particular compressor, it's a 7/8 wrench, and you just start wrenching, and you throw your wrench. I already pulled the other side, so I'm already a little tired. But you do a couple turns on one side and a couple turns on the other side. And at first, when you first start, they're fairly loose, and it doesn't take a whole lot of effort. As you start to get the spring compressed, it takes more effort to tighten the drive nuts on here. And it helps, in this case it helps. I don't actually have to compress this spring very far, which I'll show you why that's the case. But in a normal condition, the spring has to compress a good distance, so you're sitting here just wrenching away for a good bit to get all the load off of it, to have it compressed far enough to actually get it out. Yeah, so I won't make you watch me do the entire compression of this, because it's going to take me at least a few minutes. But I'll pop a link into the description for these spring compressors. It's one that I really like, and so far I like it because of that pin. I think that's a good safety feature on there. Not that playing with these at all is safe by any means, but if you can have something to make it just a little bit safer, it's worthwhile. If you have a different style that doesn't have that safety pin, something else you can do to try and help mitigate is you can take, a strap or something like that and strap a few of the coils and put a couple of ratchets on them so that it can't totally unwound if something were to break, but then that gets in your way and it's tedious, and it's not something I've ever done when I use the other style of compressors. But yeah, I'll pop a link below so you can check those out if you wanted to. I think they weren't that much, so it's a decent tool and it works. So anyway, I'll be back in a few minutes to show you what's different about these springs I'm taking out and the ones I'm putting back in. Okay, springs are out, which means we're at the halfway point of changing them because half the work's done, all the removal work, and now we got to start the reinstall. But let me show you what's different, and to take a brief break from a nice cold Coke. Let's show you what's different between what I took out of the car, which is this guy, and what I'm putting back in the car, which is this guy. You don't see it already. It's pretty obvious that these, let me rotate them so that they're the same. I'll put the end of the coil right there at my kneecap, end of the coil right there at my kneecap, are very different lengths. And my understanding is that the wagons and the sedans should have had the same front springs, assuming they had the same factory engine. These springs came from a car that was originally a straight six car. This spring is what I just pulled out of the wagon, which was originally a straight six car. And it does look, diameter-wise, age-wise, it looks consistent with everything that's been in the car for a really long time. So I think it is the factory spring, but they are a very different length. And the reason for that is because, as I suspected, you can clearly see right here where it's been hacked. Someone cut this spring and did a terrible job at it. It's not cut clean whatsoever, which means it wasn't blade cut, it was torch cut. So not only did they cut it, but they also created a whole bunch of heat in this spring at the same time, which, as you can see when you look at it right here and in this first coil, you can see how this gap is real wide and how it starts to narrow as it comes around right here. That heated this coil and it weakened all of this area of the spring. So not only did they reduce the length of the spring, but they weakened a whole section. Probably about this much of the spring's actually been compromised for what the load bearing rating was for this spring, which gave the car, a decent stance, but it made the car ride like garbage. It also doesn't look like anything else was done to the front end to account for the lower geometry, which these stock front ends don't drive well when they're at the proper ride height, much less when you just cut the spring and don't change anything else to account for the reduced spring height. So that would explain the really bad bump steer, the fact that the car doesn't want to recenter once you turn, especially to the right. When you make a right-hand turn, you have to muscle the wheel back over to center so that the car will go straight again. And that's not right. A car should naturally want the wheels to come back to center. But because these springs were reduced, all the front end geometry was just ruined, and nothing was done to correct that at all, from my guess. I would just say they got under there, they cut the spring, slapped the weight back on it, and went for it and called it good. So we're gonna be trashing these. You can see this one. This is the one out of the passenger side, and you can see they did the same thing. It's got a terrible butcher of a cut on there. Hopefully it's not too blurry. A butcher of a cut, and you can see how the coils are all warped at this area where they should be a nice consistent spaced coil like that, except for when it's produced, they do flatten them out a little bit. But there's no way that you could actually replicate that with a torch. That's machine done when the spring's produced, which is why at the top and the bottom it's identical. But this This is from superheating it, relaxing the spring while doing the cutting, which compromises everything. Yeah, so we're getting rid of these, which aren't even exactly the same length. They're a little bit off. They were fairly close, which is probably why they got under there and heated it after they cut it. They actually probably did a little of that on purpose to try and level the car back out, because I'm sure they didn't cut them perfect either. But anyway, so one thing I didn't mention earlier is before I put this up, I knew I wanted to know how much of a difference was made going back to a stock spring. So I measured the height of the car. One, I did show you the oil pan, which we had about 2 7/8 clearance on the oil pan. Right here at center of the fender with center line of the wheel, it was at 22 5/8 to the bottom of the fender arch. From the concrete to the bottom of the fender arch, we had 22 5/8 here, 2 7/8 on the oil pan. So we'll see what putting these stock springs back in does. I suspect it's going to bring it up a good bit, probably 2 inches maybe, which is probably where it needs to be for everything to work correctly. That'll probably kill our stance, or maybe it'll level it out and it might look really good, just because it's got a taller tire in the rear. But I think something may have been done to the rear leaf as well to get the rear end to relax and sit as low as it is, because it's definitely lower than stock in the back as well. The fact that I'm running a fairly tall tire compensates for some of that. But and then we're also going to be changing out these shocks because they are junk in short terms. And I can't even extend this shock at all. Oh, maybe a little bit, but as far as compressing it, I don't want to jam those studs into my leg. Do I got something I can compress it on? No. Oh, here we go. All right, bear with me. All right. So as far as compressing it, so you saw it, pull on it pretty good. Couldn't really extend it, and then compressing it. Nothing at all. It just slaps right down, and it doesn't want to return. Doesn't want to. Does not want to pull back out. If I pull on it too much, I'm going to end up hurting myself, but I got that to come back out, none. So, and it's the same way on the other side. The shock from the other side, same thing. It doesn't want to extend. The compression, nothing. So those are junk, and the shock towers are still good, so I'll get them pulled off the shock towers and probably end up throwing those shock towers on the shelf, because I already have this shock mounted up to another shock tower, and I didn't feel like messing with it. The bushing's got a good tension on them, and they're kind of old, and there's it's starting to show a little dry rot, so I didn't want to unbolt those. But this shock, decent restriction in both ways, so it'll give me a little bit of proper shock behavior that should improve the handling of the car overall. Definitely better than that junk that I took off. But anyway, I'm going to start setting up to get the new springs put in. It's a little bit tricky because you got to get the alignment just right. Make sure you got the compression tools positioned in a spot where you can actually tighten it up outside the car and still get it into the right spot. Once it's in the right spot, then it's no big deal. You just back them off in there and everything's good. As long as you make sure that you have this plate in place. You got to make sure that stud, that piece that's bent up, is actually keyed in to the bottom of the fender well. This goes on top of the spring. But yeah, as long as you got this in place, you can see, it comes up and comes to a dead end. You want your coil spring kissed up against that right there. And then the other side that I pointed out on the control arm, there's another dead end where the other end of the coil spring is supposed to be kissed up. So that's what I'm talking about. You gotta have it all, make sure it's all clocked right when it's compressed, so that you can uncompress it, get the tools off, and have it be in the right spot. So that'll take a little finesse. Once we get there, I'll show you what I've got, and we'll keep right on trucking along. Well, it wasn't fun. and it wasn't quick, but springs are in. Shocks are in, and other than putting this wheel back on, sorry I'm getting down here so I can show you. Other than putting this wheel back on, I've got it all put back together. Adjust the camera angle so I can get it in here. Stock springs in. You can see that's right there. At full droop like it was before, I can't wiggle this spring at all like I could that other cut spring. I ended up switching the mud covers for the springs to the ones that I pulled off the red car. They're just, in general, they're in a little bit better shape. They could use a cleanup and a coat of paint, but the ones I actually took off this car aren't in terrible shape either. They look grody because they've got all this, but this is actually some sort of undercoating that I think can be stripped off of those, and those will paint up and look just fine. So I'll end up redoing those ones, and why these ones are doing the temporary job eventually. But yeah, so, and then the shocks are swapped. So we've got the shocks in there. Get up. You can see the shock towers are back in. I got the carriage bolts switched out with those other ones I was showing a little bit ago. And everything should be just about ready to go. So all that's left is to get this, this last wheel bolted up, and then we can drop it back down on the ground, bounce on it a little bit and see, so the springs will kind of settle. They won't completely settle out because you kind of need to drive it and roll it and let the suspension really move a little bit for it to settle out. But it'll give us an idea of where we're at. The difference in settling might only be another 1/4 inch or so from wherever it's at when we put it down. But yeah, so here in just a flash, we'll have the wheel on, and I'll drop it on camera, but I won't make you watch me bolt up the wheel. There ain't nothing exciting about that. So yeah, give me just a second, and we're back. Wheel is on, jack stands are out. Let's drop this old girl down, and let's find out if all this effort to swap out the junky springs was worth it, or if we're going to be sitting like a gasser. This one's not supposed to be a gasser. Ooh, it's definitely higher, a lot higher. All right, well, I don't think we're going to be dragging anymore. Let's see, grab a tape measure. Now, when I measured this before, like I said, I measured from the ground to the center of the arc, across the top of the wheel, or across the center line of the wheel, and I came up with 22 5/8. Now, we are at 25 and 7/8, just a little bit shy of 26. So that's 3 1/4 inches that this just came up by swapping those springs. That's a lot. See if we came up the same on the other side. Yeah, the other side's nearly identical, and it's still got to settle out a little bit. Well, the good news is, I guess, is until I figure out how I want to lower it correctly, we shouldn't have a problem with the oil pan hitting. Let's see what our oil pan clearance is. So before, when I had this in there, we had 2 7/8 was my oil pan clearance before. Now, bear with me for a second. I gotta readjust everything. See if I can't get this so that you can see under there while I look for myself. Tweak that, adjust that. Ooh, going for a ride. Yeah, all right. Well, yeah, it looks like it's going to stay right there. Okay. All right, we're going to reach under. That's kind of staying there. All right. And now that's a 6-inch ruler. I've got it squared up to the ground, and we've got right about 3/8 of an inch left, which means we have 5 5/8 inch oil pan clearance. So that's good. We're not going to have any issues with that oil pan anymore. We'll be able to drive it without risk of destroying everything under here. And as you can see, I still need an inspection cover, but we're working on that. I thought I had one found, and it doesn't look like it's going to work. It was hitting the headers, or I got to do something different with the headers. I don't know. So yeah, it looks like we've fixed our clearance issues. I gotta readjust the handle here so that this all, there we go, so I can hold the camera right. Now the car actually, it's a little nose high. Let me get back. Yeah, it doesn't quite have the same pizzazz that it had before as far as aesthetic appeal. Maybe a cap will help. That's what's missing. It looks like it's hard to tell what's going on in the front because there's no cap. Let me pop a cap on there. This'll fix it. Hey. Okay. Let's see. I'm gonna take a step back and look at this with you. Now, I actually think it's sitting perfectly level. Let's measure the rocker. If the rocker is almost the same, then we should be damn near level. All right. So, to the bottom of the pinch, right here at the front of the driver's door, that's 9.5 inches. Okay, let's go back here. Bottom of the pinch back here at the back of the car. Oh, we are 9 7/8. So we have a 3/8 rake. The front's 3/8 of an inch, at least at the driver's door to the passenger door. We have it's 3/8 of an inch higher back here, which means we do still have a little bit of forward rake. But this gap right here, that's no bueno. That doesn't look good. And if I put a tire on there big enough to make that gap go away, then we'll lose that 3/8, and we'll be nose high. So we can definitely drive the car the way it is, but we'll have to decide on another solution for the front to get it down. Well, let's see, how far down does it really need to go? It needs to go 2 inches. So in my opinion, it needs to go down 2 inches so that the top of the tire, this size, is right here aligned with the arch of the fender. That's where I would want to see it. So the springs we just took off, the hacked Ride Terrible springs, gave us, what was it? 3 1/4. We're at 22 5/8. Now we're 25 7/8. So yeah, 3 1/4. So we need something that's going to lower it 2 inches. Those went 3 1/4, so we'd be 1 1/4 inches above where we were to be just right. Anyway, that's a problem for another day. I'm gonna have to do some parts research. One of the things that this car does still have, as you've seen, is a stock front clip. And what you can do with the stock front clip is extremely limited on these cars. So we're probably going to be looking at doing a Mustang 2 IFIS kit. And now I know where this sits with stock springs and the size tire I want to run. And since I need a 2-inch drop to be where I want to be, I know what I need to order in an IFIS kit when I'm ready to do it, which hopefully that'll be sooner than later, but that's all dictated by budget. So we'll have to look at what that's going to run and how we're going to do that, and how soon we want to do that, because right now, once we do the wiring, which I still have not addressed because I'm waiting on some supplies to come in to get this rewired. And you probably didn't see that, but waiting on some supplies to come in so I can rewire the alternator setup and clean up all of this garbage. That's what we'll probably be doing next time. But once that's done, and maybe one other thing, I'll be able to drive the car the way it is. And so I might leave it alone for a little while, or I might not. I also really want to get back on this project, which needs a whole lot of time and also needs a budget. So we'll have to decide how we're going to tackle that, and that's a problem for me to figure out and you to not be bored by. So thanks again for tuning in. Hopefully you found something about this entertaining. If not, well, oh well, it's your fault for watching. We'll see you on the next one.